everybody. Sergeant Argybright here, and today we're finally going to be reacting to part 2 of the German tank meme from Potential History. So let's get into it.
Here they are.
Whoops. Interesting TV there. I don't think TVs used to look like that. I don't think that happened.
Next, ladies and gentlemen, we have three fine young men from
Germany.
They're coming. Hold on, they're coming.
They're coming. They're coming.
Here they are.
Panzerwaffe.
Panzerwaffe. Actually sounds kind of nice. What the heck? What is this intro?
This video is sponsored by Retail Me.
What the heck was that? These are like the weirdest intros I've ever seen.
More on that in a minute. This is part 2 to my previous German tank video, where I left off talking about the production methods that slowed the number of tanks available on the battlefield. These changes became the hallmark of the next era of German tanks, the Jet
Erica.
which are what most people think about when discussing German tanks. The Tiger, Panther, Tiger LSP, or Tiger II.
The song sounds
These
really
tanks
nice,
see
by
Germany
the
shift
way.
from
You
an
should check
emphasis
it
on
out.
speedy, maneuverable tanks to thick. The Panther was thrown into production very quickly as a response to Soviet tanks. It suffered in its early days from mechanical issues due to a very short development period. The Tiger I had been in development before the war, with the initial design being proposed in 1935 for a large breakthrough tank, though later grew from a first proposed 30-ton design to a 57-ton in the final Alps E variant. These tanks would have some teething problems, but in their later variants, the reliability issues would be addressed, although not completely fixed, with some of these late war problems being detailed in the post-war French Panther report.
Final draft.
The Tiger II was the final fielded tank model and was the pinnacle of German heavy tank design, showing up very late in the war with very few models being made, and often falling victim to fuel shortages, causing them to be abandoned. In recent years,
I told you, fuel shortages. Why did they invade the Soviet Union? Everyone asks. Oil. As they just said right there, even though they just said it was for a completely different reason whenever they did their Operation Barbarossa series.
Second look has been taken at these tanks, showing that in a defensive position, the guns and armor that they had made them excellent vehicles, but due to the complexity of their designs and reliability issues, they weren't completely all that they were made up to be. There's a really interesting...
Maybe, instead of making a bunch of new models, they should work on fixing the models they already have. You know, especially when they barely have enough fuel to run them as it is.
Talk by John Parshall online, where he explains the different...
And another blunder Germany did was at the end of the near the end of the war, I guess, Germany was using tanks against tanks, like their tanks against the enemy tanks, instead of using anti-tank guns against tanks, which is a lot better and more efficient. They did use anti-tank guns a lot at the beginning, especially in North Africa. Like, seriously, those anti-tank guns, they tore apart the British. Seriously. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. Yeah, Germany sort of screwed themselves by doing that. And they wasted a lot of tanks and resources.
Different approaches to manufacture between the different...
Wow, look at that! Look at that difference. Doesn't even seem like Germany has that much.
Tanks. And he highlights the difference between the low-cost, few-model, long-run system of the Allies and the high-cost, multiple-model, few-run system of the Germans.
So it's like quality versus quantity, I guess you could say. But Germany doesn't have the reasons for the quality or the quantity, which makes it even more hilarious.
And this is what I was getting to with the multiple variant issue earlier. He mentions that when going through the Tiger reference Bible, there were enough changes made during the production cycle that on average every 6th tank was in some way different than the previous one. And as I
Really?
said, most of these were smaller
That's a lot.
changes that didn't change much about the overall performance of the vehicle, such as the repositioning of the GM on the Tiger 1, with bigger changes such as upgrades from an HL210 to an HL230 being less common. But it shows how often changes to the design were made that would overall slow down the production process, causing
Whoops.
fewer units to be produced that rarely make any sweeping positive changes to the capability of the vehicle that redesigning more important parts such as the gun or the power system would have. And these are the changes that you see made in major increments in the Allied factories.
The Germans are often... Oops, sorry about that. Oh, I can move it. I did not know that. Look at that. Okay, well, what is that? Go... Why is Discord open? Okay, when the Germans are often making new designs from scratch, when the Germans are often making new designs from scratch, when these test upgrades are
kept older designs relevant. Despite this, though, Gen 3 German tanks, when implemented correctly, did perform quite well on the battlefield, which makes sense with them having very powerful guns being used mostly on the defensive. However, because
Yeah,
they are
exactly,
on the
like I
defensive,
said earlier.
kill counts for German tanks are very difficult to reliably track, and they have most likely been inflated over the years. The most obvious symptom of this is the near hero worship of German tank aces and their kill counts that aren't based on anything very substantial. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this image before on some sort of forum or news feed. And you might have wondered for these big claims being made where these numbers came from.
There's a lot of
frankly,
kills.
very unreliable places. German tank ace kill numbers
What's the point of that sound?
Come from two main places. Claims from the crews themselves and memoirs or field reports, or propaganda pieces from a time shown to the general public in Germany to create continued hope for the war effort. And it should go without saying that neither of these are very reliable sources for numbers.
Yeah.
Memoirs are troublesome in general just because they're often not sourced or poorly sourced and are very open to personal bias. And the propaganda newsreels are exactly that, propaganda. The Germans themselves, in their reports on Soviet tank losses, were aware that their tank crews overestimated kills, with many of them able to be repaired once knocked out, or only being rendered inactive for that engagement, able to be put back into the fight once the particular battle was over, and often reduced the number of kill claims by 35 to 50% to get more accurate readings on their guessings of remaining Soviet tanks. There's a really well-sourced article down at the description going into detail on this, coming to the conclusion that basically ace kill claims are nearly impossible to verify and shouldn't be taken too seriously, and the discussion on them really doesn't go anywhere. But that's not to say that German tanks didn't kill in favorable ratios, especially late in the war, as being on the defensive would suit that very well. Germany closed the war in an interesting spot, as they had a few tank designs that they were working on that didn't get past the trial phases before they were utterly destroyed at the end, including the super heavy Maus in E100, along with a whole new line of standard Panzers that would replace the current line of tanks with different classifications and models that would share as many parts as possible to simplify production and repair. The Maus had two prototypes completed that the Germans destroyed before the Soviets could get to them, with one still surviving made up of the turret of one and the hull of another. The E100 had one prototype that wasn't yet completed, that was found by the British at the end of the war, taken back to Great Britain and later dismantled. A lot of people think that these super heavy vehicles, had they gone into production and seen action, would have been very successful due to the two-dimensional look of vehicles that various tank games have promoted.
I don't know about that.
The idea that more armor and a bigger gun in a vacuum means better design. But both of these tanks, that could have only been made in small numbers, would make very big targets on the battlefield that, although hard to punch through, would be slow, poorly maneuverable targets for things like fighter bombers.
And they would break down a lot.
Or large caliber artillery. Or even infantry if one of these large tanks was out unsupported, and probably would not have made really any difference in the grand scheme of the war. Sizing up these large...
Germany would have had a much better time if they just stopped making tanks at all and conserved their resources. Because they don't need tanks at that point. They're not blitzkrieging except for like the Battle of the Bulge, which didn't really work. It all it did was delay the Allies a couple weeks. That's all it accomplished. They didn't need tanks at the end of the war. It would have been much better for them to invest in anti-tank guns and use those extra resources elsewhere. Like for the Luftwaffe, it would have been much smarter for them to use the fuel that they used for their tanks for their planes instead, because they needed planes. They were getting bombed left and right at the end of the war.
The pinnacle of German tank production, as it were. Really,
Britain bombed Germany many more times than Germany bombed Britain. It was crazy.
Gets me to my final point. The The biggest criticism that German tanks get is that the Gen 3 tanks, although impressive, should have been ignored in favor of producing more Panzer IVs or other vehicles that would have been made in higher numbers to play the same production game that the Allies were. The issue is that Germany was not set up in any way to play the numbers game. Even if you focused more on Panzer IVs, the fuel and manpower shortages would still curtail the numbers of them that you could have deployed at the cost of less capability from the vehicle that you send out. Yes, the German Gen 3 tanks are overcomplicated. They were really like taking a nice sports car to a demolition derby. But although it wasn't the best strategy, it was the best option out of a list of bad ones in the situation that Germany had backed itself into. And I know I sound like a broken record at this point with all the videos that I've made about it.
Well, if you don't have any options with the tanks, then don't use the tanks. You use it for more important things, like I just said.
By the time this last generation of tanks makes it to the field, Germany is in an economic war that it can't win.
Yeah.
So although the loss...
It's interesting. It's similar to what happened in World War I. Germany just pretty much ran out of resources, and that was the downfall. Except it was slightly different. But it's very similar at the same time.
The loss of one tank is a huge loss to the Germans compared to the loss of one tank for the Allies. It's hoped that it can take out enough Allied ones before it's destroyed to make it worth it, by it being the best thing that it can be. Now, the reliability issues sort of fly in the face of this, but the things that would have resolved these issues, such as engine development and stronger tooling, take time to create, time that Germany didn't have. So the option they went with at the end of the war, although vastly different from what they wanted going into the war with fast tanks for maneuver, was the best option they had left to go with out of a need for more performance out of every vehicle, pushing them toward...
It's not their only option. I gave an option. That was probably their greatest option.
It's the only solution they could economically afford that was the best.
Anti-tank guns are not that expensive compared to tanks.
Bad situation.
I think.
Now, as you can imagine, these tanks were not cheap, but the Germans were stuck paying full price because they had no other option. When it comes to your own
they did.
That doesn't have to be the case.
Okay, well, okay. That's done. Stop saying they don't have any options. I gave an option. That would have been great for them. Because I know, I keep saying this over and over again. But if they were, they were in North Africa at the beginning of the war, they were tearing up the British tanks. Yeah, you would not believe it. It was crazy. They were just ripping them apart with their 88s. I think they're 88s. Yeah, if they would have just used those more often in the European front, they'd have been so much better off. Especially since the Allies, if you saw that other chart earlier in the video, the Allies just outproduced them many times over, I think. I don't know. I don't remember the exact chart. That's what it looked like. But yeah. That was a cool video. I think that's the last of the series. And yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.